5-minute recap. Alex and Kirby talked about sacrifice. When they talked about sacrifice, they talked about the things that they had to give up to be able to hit the point where they're at now with their investing and with their life process. So what did they do? Well, what they had going wrong, what they had going right, and they had to adjust accordingly. So what they did was look at that adjustment, and then Kirby talked about what he called the 80-20 rule. Well, he didn't really call it, I call it 80-20 rule, but he just called it 80-20. Basically what he would do was he'd save 80% of his money, he'd live off of 20%, and he continued that process until now it's a habit. He doesn't really have to think about it anymore. He's making more than enough in his 20% that it covers even in the 80, and then on top of that, with that 80 that he has coming in is being saved anyway, which makes it an excellent choice and an excellent way to go about executing his business plan. Next, they both did something that I don't think either one of them recognized or said, and that was they decided on what they needed to fix. So before you do any of the 80-20 rule, any of the finding out a plan or finding some kind of motivation, you have to decide and figure out where you're falling short in your plan to save funding. Now, this is very important because it allows you to backwards plan, as from what I can tell, most, if not all, do when they're deciding on what their goals are going to be in the future. So figure out what that plan is, where you want to go, so you can go about fixing it on the back end. Next, Kirby and Alex actually talked about all the sacrifice that they gave up. They talked about the identification, but what they did not actually kind of expound upon, and I have to go back and talk with them again, is their motivation to do so. One thing Kirby pointed out during our conversation was how much he was motivated by, he wanted to fuss at Dave Ramsey and tell him how much his process didn't work, how much he disliked the way he was doing things and he didn't want to do it. So you have to find that motivation in yourself to go about doing the same thing. And that's something I've got to look into myself as well to figure out what's my motivation to really do this. One thing Alex actually mentioned, and I thought was really dope when it came to sacrifice, and this, I'm gonna close out on this one. Alex said, why should I give money to those who aren't making the same sacrifices that myself and my wife are? And that's interesting because you find from all the millionaires that I've talked to, from all the real estate investors that I've talked to who've been doing this thing, they all say that at some point people start putting their hands out, which is understandable. I get it. It happens to everybody. But they learn to say no. And I say the same thing to you. Make sure you're understanding how to say no.